What is up, YouTube? I'm Devon DaVinci, leader of the Renaissance Crew, and you're watching DaVinci Reacts. Today I'm going to be getting into a video that I've had on my watch list for a minute now. It was an interesting concept, so I decided to check it out. This video was uploaded by Monsieur Z, I believe his name or their name is pronounced. And the video is called "Why Colonialism Isn't Over and Who Will Take What." Now, the reason why I say it's interesting is because when I was watching the Fallen of World War II video, it did mention in it that colonial wars are pretty much over. That doesn't really happen. But the thing is, colonialism can still happen. It just doesn't happen on a military type thing. It's more geopolitical. You have countries, especially like countries like China, where they will take control of infrastructure and natural resources of other countries, and then pretty much use those assets to gain power and influence over that country to the point where they're kind of doing China's bidding. I could see Russia doing something similar to that. The United States does that a lot. There's a lot. Yeah, colonialism still happens. It just doesn't happen in the same way it did in the past, where you go into a country and physically like take it over. So yeah, let's check this out, see what it has to offer. I'm curious to see what different ways it will explain colonialism and give a more of a complete look at how it all works. But anyway, let's check this out.
In the previous few centuries, modern history has brought us.
I will have a link for Monsieur Z's channel at the end of this video, the last 30 seconds. Click on it if you want to check that out, and you can go watch all their other videos, like, comment, subscribe, and all the other good stuff. I will have a link for the original video in the description box down below in case you want to watch the original video yourself, or if you're a reactor and want to do a reaction to it yourself, that's the link you would use. And I'm going to have a plug for my Patreon at the end of the video if you would like to learn more about exclusive content that I offer. Let's go.
In the previous few centuries, modern history has brought us two ages of grand-scale colonial expansion. First came the Age of Discovery, when the revealing of the New World to the European continent sparked a great grab for territory. The major participants of this land grab having been England and Spain, with France, the Netherlands, and Portugal playing supporting roles, whose impact upon the continents is still present, though dwarfed by the dominant English and Spanish cultures.
I'm sorry I paused it so soon, but another thing I have to do, that's a quick correction. In my oversimplified Falklands video, or reaction, I said something about how... I said something extremely stupid. I said, like, they were fighting over the Falklands, Britain was getting in on the colonialism stuff. I said, why isn't Spain like doing... I forgot exactly the context of which I was talking about, but something led to me saying something similar to, like, why isn't Spain getting in on that action? And I don't know why I didn't think about the conquest of the New World that the Spanish did. I have no fucking idea what happened during that whole discussion. So I'm going to take a massive L on that. I have no idea why I said that. Kind of similar to the comment that I made about World War II being the deadliest war in America. Something like that, the American history, despite the fact that I knew it was the Civil War, but for some reason I said that. Maybe I was talking about world history, the most deadly war in world history, and then just accidentally said American. I don't know. You know how Americans think that America is the center of the world, so maybe I just assumed I took world for America. I don't know. But those were two massive L's that I had to take, and I'll just have to take them.
Brazil, a massive Portuguese colony, being the key exception. This colonial age brought about new riches and responsibilities which propelled Spain, England, and France to not merely positions of leadership in steering European affairs, but rising significance on the global scale. The competition of this period drove empire against empire, while the overwhelming toll of war on both the economy and the recruited populace spelled periods of unrest within what you might call the losers of the competition. Internal turmoil consuming France and Spain especially, laying way for one of Europe's first great struggles against itself, the Napoleonic Wars. The heavy losses of this conflict and the earlier breakaway of the United States from European rule led the majority of Europe to retreat from New World ambitions and instead focus on both domestic and Eastern interests. It'd be here that clashes over economic assets paired with the development of overwhelming new technologies would manifest into an age of new imperialism. The near entirety of the African continent would be divided amongst the European empires. The whole of India and Australia would come under British dominion, and the declining Chinese dynasty would attract the interest of Japan, Russia, Germany, and Britain. Now virtually every major European power, as well as Japan and the US, held their very own colonial realms, but as was the case in the past, these lands came with new responsibilities and new rivalries. The Germans and Italians had recently emerged as unitary nations in their own right, and the Germans especially were determined to break out of what they saw as a British-dominated world order. Britain held authority over the globe's largest empire, dominated global trade, and maintained a firm seat in directing Europe's future, despite being physically separated from the continent and, in reality, being far more invested in its international Anglosphere over the affairs of continental Europe. Germany aimed to change that by rallying the European states around its own domestic economic engine, which it planned to fuel and supercharge with the help of colonial resources. Unlike Britain, Germany's empire would bring wealth directly to the continent in an envisioned German-dominated economic union known as Middle Europa. These ambitions proved threatening to both Britain and France, the French having recently been surpassed by Germany as Europe's leading land power, something the French resented greatly, bringing them to the side of their former rival, Britain. This new rivalry and the growing tensions behind it would erupt in the form of two world wars, with France and Britain at the helm of a Western coalition, and Germany drawing upon support from Central Europe. As before, the devastation of this terrible war left the empires crippled and unable to maintain hold over their colonial dominions. The US would rise as the West's new leading power in the years following, and its agenda would be one which called for decolonization. Physically weakened and unable to deny American demands, the empires of Europe receded. Alternatives were offered to colonial riches in the form of formalized economic arrangements with many of these newly independent states. However, the abruptness of decolonization and the unstable nature of global politics at the time led many of these former colonies to spiral into financial and political ruin. In the modern day and age, one might consider colonialism a system dead and gone. We've seemingly embraced the ideals that US President Woodrow Wilson laid out at the end of the First Great War, which called for the right of self-rule and self-determination of peoples, the concept of nation-states, and the protection of those states by global organizations like the UN. Now, the ideal of colonization does still manifest among us, but seemingly no longer as an empire colonizing an underdeveloped land, but now as humanity with its eyes turned to the stars, aiming to colonize other planets in hope of securing our existence from whatever disaster might threaten life here on Earth. Though this ambition seems a natural progression for us, it's likely only part of a larger picture. Space is the new world, but here in our home realm we still have borders to settle and claims to resolve. Nations like China, Russia, India, Indonesia, Israel, Morocco, and more all arguably still participate in colonization of some variety, and that's not even taking into account the several small overseas possessions held by the US and European powers. Ironically, and perhaps suspiciously, the present leading members of the UN Special Committee for Decolonization are themselves active colonizers who repeatedly dismiss or complicate claims made against their own actions. Looking at this map, one could argue this represents an eastern bloc of rising colonial powers whose prime goal is to weaken the old empires of the West however they can. What this all amounts to is that while colonization has slowed down, been undone in several states, and seemingly fallen out of favor, colonial rivalries and ambitions still exist. Massive land grabs have seemingly been suppressed by an arguable period of calm and attempted civility, but everything from resource wars in far-off lands to orchestrated regime changes and suppression of population A by population B indicates that colonization is far from over, but merely experiencing a dormant period from which it will eventually reawaken.
I mean, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. Now, it's true that someone's going to come through and try to continue to do like large land grabs and things like that. That's inevitable. But with the world that we're going into now, we have this thing that didn't exist back when colonialism was dominant, and that is just how well connected the entire world is now. Now it's like every country is connected directly through communications and through economic like treaties and trade and things like that. Like, it's so much connected that if somebody were to try to grab everything at once, they would be instantly like tackled by everybody in the world. Like imagine a world where a person like Hitler tries to take over everything, but instead of the whole appeasement thing where one power tries to slowly like negotiate and be diplomatic while Hitler is continuing to do crazy acts that are obviously hostile. Now we're in a world where it's just like, okay, stop. If you don't stop, then we're going to either form a coup in your country that's going to lead to you being overthrown, then we're going to put somebody in that do support what we want, or we're just going to flat out declare war on you and you're going to have a battle against everyone. The only way something like that could happen would be if, I mean, the only way somebody could try to do a land grab and it be something that gets past that is if the country that is in charge of it is a country that already has tremendous power, like someone like Russia, China, or United States or something like that. Or if they're able to secretly create all these deals with other countries, and then when they do finally decide to make their move, all their allies go at the exact same time. It's like they have all these like sleeper agents in the building and you don't know anything about it, but then when they decide to act, all the sleeper agents activate, and then it's like you have this entire like half the world that's with them, and I don't see that happening. So again, the only likely scenario would be if a country that is extremely powerful were to become this rogue country, like the United States, for example. Even then, I don't think that it would be a win. I mean, it'd be a tough fight, but I think the United States would still end up losing when you talk about all that, because all trade will be stopped. They'd have to go against everybody's militaries. Our economy over here would be completely bust, and I don't give a damn how strong a nation's military is if the people of that nation get to a point where they feel like they're sick and tired of everything. Like if they get to the point where the war has affected them so badly that they're beaten down and impoverished and can't eat and can't take care of their families and things like that, that's going to cause that country's downfall, period. I can guarantee you that. It doesn't matter how powerful the nation is. When the people decide that enough is enough, enough is enough. And I can guarantee you right now in America, with everything being kind of divided the way it is, if somebody were to take control of America, and like that figure that would take control of America and try to do something like this, from the opening gate, they'd already have half the country against them because of the political situation over here. Like, they'd already be at a point where half the country is already ready to get rid of them. It would just be a matter of convincing some of the people that followed that person. And yeah, it's extremely unlikely. Now, with that being said, let's continue.
The question then, whenever in the future this might occur, is who will be the colonizers and who will be colonized? We've already gone over some past and present colonizers, and a good place to continue from there is investigating the economies of these states. A colonial power understandably needs some surplus revenue to fund its expansion. Likewise, failing economies are likely to become heavily dependent upon other nations with money to spare, opening the door for a colonial relationship to be established.
Yeah.
As you can see by this map, the world's top 20 economies by GDP include the likes of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Mexico, Russia, the US, UK, China, and more. Of those 20, China, India, Indonesia, Korea, Australia, the US, Brazil, and Turkey lead in economic growth. Inversely, this map here shows a combination of countries ranked among the world's poorest, most underdeveloped, most corrupt, or underpopulated as determined by the UN, the International Monetary Fund, and Transparency International. Countries ranked poorest or most underdeveloped are likely to come under the influence of a greater power, seeking to extract some benefit from the country in exchange for developmental assistance, whilst those ranked most corrupt or underpopulated are likely to be more aggressively dominated by a stronger neighboring power, seeking to enforce stability in its geopolitical neighborhood, or simply take valuable lands which can't be so easily protected. Next, we need to determine the ambitions of these future empires. Who wants or needs land beyond what they already possess, be it to house a growing population, extract resources, reclaim for historic purposes, or use for strategic reasons?
Somebody in one of my previous videos left a comment about how China, while they are a large country. They don't have a lot of quality natural resources. Um, so that could be a motivator for them wanting to expand. The United States is always looking for different forms of energy, so oil and stuff like that is always a motivator. Um, I would imagine European countries would probably, like, their motivation maybe would be, and I could be wrong about this, so forgive me if I am, but their motivation could be they want to get from underneath the dependency they kind of have for the United States and things like that. Because even though they are strong nations and can take care of themselves, um, I would imagine if they got into a big war with some other country, they would probably be looking to the G7 to help them out in some, or the countries that are normally in the G7 or NATO or whatever. They're going to be looking for help from those countries. And America would probably be a very big assistant in that. So maybe that could be a motivator, or maybe just a motivator could be they want to reclaim the old empire that they had before everything went to shit with the world wars. I mean, it must be a bit of an ego hit for a nation like the UK, which literally owned like half the world at one point, to kind of give all that up. Like, I could imagine them being like, you know what? Fuck it. We're going back to our old selves. But that's all a joke, but still. I can picture China. I see them having a motivation. The United States, Russia for sure. They would probably want that Eastern Bloc back and try to re-establish the Soviet Union. So I can definitely see that happening. Probably be a bit hard to explain other countries. Maybe Saudi Arabia to try to connect the Islamic countries together under themselves. Maybe. Possibly Turkey to reestablish the Ottoman Empire, maybe. Or territories that the Ottoman Empire controlled, maybe, possibly. But yeah, outside of China and the United States, the only thing I can think of is countries trying to reclaim old glory.
Let's take Germany as an example. If we look at the Germans in present day, we see that their historic desire for a central role in continental European politics has been in most part fulfilled thanks to the European Union. The German economy is strong, and so are its relations with its neighbors. Thus, German ambition for colonization is low. In contrast, the UK, which as historically has been the case, is economically and politically isolated from mainland Europe, has few resources to work with, and stands at risk of losing its place as a leading global power, has great reason to seek colonial revival. The UK's most immediate and likely colonial allies are its former settler colonies of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, which still share a monarch with the UK, hold strong cultural ties with one another, and offer each other substantial strategic and economic benefits. This may only be the first step in the revival of Britain's empire, and it stands more as a unique partnership than the direct colonial expansions we'll soon cover. We could expect this new British Empire to begin expanding along its major trade routes, most notably along the Caribbean and East African coast. China is perhaps one of the most interesting cases, as it holds potential to carry out one of the most expansive colonial policies in the coming future, and create a ripple effect across Asia, triggering colonial efforts by other rising powers. In recent history, China has expressed interest in the region of the Himalayas, particularly annexing the states of Nepal and Bhutan, along with northern portions of India, much as it had done with Tibet back in 1950. China's government, after bringing that state under its control, migrated large populations of Han Chinese to Tibet, and suppressed the local traditions under the guise of promoting cultural unity, a euphemistic phrase one could apply to nearly any historic occupation and conversion effort. China justifies its actions as having increased the quality of life, technological development, and economic growth of Tibet, but such is generally a given when a far stronger state colonizes a smaller state. Whether it's morally right or wrong, there's no denying it's plainly colonization. Direct invasions aside, politically China has also been known to establish deep roots in its neighboring countries, being accused of using both high-ranking connections and debt-trap diplomacy to subjugate several of its neighbors to its whim. While China could certainly use this strategy to force territorial concessions from many of its neighbors, it's unlikely to fully annex large states like Kazakhstan or India, though Mongolia, with its small economy, excess landmass, and tiny population, could see integration into a greater China at some point, All the while, smaller concessions are acquired in Central Asia to further the reach of Chinese trade and the New Silk Road. Chinese expansionism is likely to set off nearby India and Indonesia, who themselves would be concerned with preserving their interests in the east. Indonesia would likely seize Malaysia and Brunei to prevent the Chinese from gaining a major foothold on their island of Borneo. These annexations also fulfilling a historic claim to these territories, though one which the country may not have gone out of its way to acquire otherwise, as it appears fairly content in its present relations. Indonesia is likely to remain a competitor to China, restricting its claims in the South Sea, but otherwise attempting to remain neutral as its own colonial ambitions are rather low. Moving over to India, we find that it had historically maintained close relations with neighboring Myanmar to keep peace in the region, to the point that one might argue the relationship was that of a protectorate and a protector empire. Myanmar was at a time a province of India, but following its independence and the rise of internal instability created by separatist insurgencies, the government found itself torn between pro-Chinese and pro-Indian factions. Given how chaotic Myanmar...
I know normally militaries are, like when you're young, you get into militaries like 18, 19. That's usually when people sign up and stuff. But these dudes look young. Like, I don't know, maybe if it's just like the look or whatever. They just naturally look younger. But they look like they're like 16. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure they can do some damage, but it's just when I look at them, I just see like they remind me of teenagers.
The government found itself torn between pro-Chinese and pro-Indian factions. Given how chaotic Myanmar remains to this day after several decades of civil war, India may take it upon itself to issue a large-scale occupation to both restore peace and prevent further Chinese expansion. China and India are perhaps the most likely to engage in colonial wars against each other, as their individual expansions create repeated disputes, including ones involving neighboring Pakistan and perhaps reaching as far as Afghanistan. The fact that China, India, and Pakistan are nuclear powers could mean the use of small and tactical nuclear weapons is a possibility, but the overall threat to the world as a whole is likely very minor. Outside of mainland expansions, China and India can be expected to also compete in Africa, where the two hold a number of economic interests. Russia can be expected to tighten its relationship with former members of the Soviet Union, as has been demonstrated by its interest in the Union state between Russia and Belarus, the establishment of the Eurasian Economic Union, and Russian support for separatist movements in less cooperative post-Soviet countries such as Georgia and Ukraine. Russia's main goals include placing greater distance between Western Russia and the EU, weakening the EU or neutralizing it as a threat to the Russian agenda, and developing relations with lesser Eurasian powers to enrich Russia and the Eurasian region as a whole so that it might stand alone from the Western powers. Russia's capabilities are often criticized as those of a waning power, and though Russia may no longer hold the global significance it once did during the Cold War, its age-old expansionist strategy is not something to be taken lightly. Russian ambitions have been and remain extremely high, with no sign of slowing. This means that Russia may acquire new territories at a slow pace, however it is very likely to hold on to them in the long term. Russia's relations with China would begin to grow more tense as the much larger Chinese economy now creeped ever closer to Russian interests, challenging their perceived position as leader of Eurasia. Proxy wars between the two are likely, but direct conflict seems out of the question unless China began to threaten Russian land in the Far East. Another power with much ambition but uncertainty in its own direction is Brazil. Brazil has proven itself to be an opportunistic power which is eager to break into the role of a global powerhouse, however often finds itself in conflict over how to go about achieving this. Brazil has well-established ties with the US, China, India, and Russia, the latter three being on account of its membership in the BRICS Association. Brazil has previously expressed interest in widening trade opportunities with Asia, China in particular, through either a land route into the Pacific or through special partnership with former Portuguese port colonies in Africa, Indonesia, and China. If, emboldened by the colonial efforts being undertaken in Asia, Brazil were to utilize colonization itself to achieve their goals, they might do so by annexing the underpopulated south of Peru, granting them direct access to the Pacific, or perhaps even colonize the former Portuguese colonies of Angola and Mozambique. Of all the states previously mentioned, Brazil is perhaps the least likely to establish major colonies, as despite possessing big aspirations, it seems far more preoccupied with its own domestic disputes to begin investing itself elsewhere. Tiny port colonies might be established in Africa and efforts might be made to force a concession from Peru, but otherwise external colonization, though it may occur, is highly limited for Brazil. With that taken into consideration, it should also be emphasized that Brazil presently holds dominion over a vast swath of underdeveloped indigenous land in the Amazon region. Interest in assimilating and developing parts of the Amazon have recently been reignited, indicating that this is the most likely direction for Brazil to follow in regard to colonization. Entry into this region could also be Brazil's first step toward accessing the Pacific. Turkey, though it may attempt to exert its influence further into the Middle East, would be at odds with powers nearly as formidable as itself, thus preventing any notable expansions. At present, Turkey occupies a portion of ethnic Kurdish land which could arguably be considered a colony, the Turks having historically held colonial dominion over a vast portion of the Islamic world, retaining this distinct population as a remnant of that empire. Israel, though not one of the leading economies we mentioned, could be expected to solidify its control over the Levant, and the same would go for Morocco's present interest in the Sahara, as both stand relatively unmatched by their lands of interest. Moving on to North America, we find the interesting case of Mexico, a nation which has historically suffered from near non-stop instability, but seems to be finding its stride, joining the likes of several other advancing nations. Mexico, however, borders states to the south with some of the highest poverty rates in North America and some of the highest crime rates in the world. The governments of these states are often criticized as being rife with corruption, and an overall lack of action from them has tended to allow such crime to spill over into Mexico. Much as had been the case for the US during the age of the Banana Wars, Mexico may take it upon itself to assume a guiding role in Central America through political, economic, or military means, especially as the Mexican drug war continues and many cartels find neighboring Guatemala a safe haven from which to continue their operations, and where they allegedly hold influence over 3/4 of the country. Mexico presently finds itself struggling to resolve such issues within its own borders. However, as the nation advances, that may no longer be the case, but by that time criminal operations are likely to spread to the rest of Central America, which Mexico would then need to address. The Mexican government already holds interest in developing and bringing these states closer together, as the Mesoamerican project demonstrates, leaving little doubt that if given the opportunity, Mexico would attempt to use a military campaign in Central America to further its influence there.
Now, if Mexico were to be taken over, not taken over, but were to elect a leader that was ambitious as far as expansion and things like that, was more aggressive, I could see them expanding in certain areas and using the same argument that like Russia and China use, in that they're expanding to protect themselves from being constantly attacked and invaded and things like that. Because if you look at Mexico, especially the relationship with the United States, because while we are friends and things like that, we have a very checkered past, like constant wars. We've taken a ton of their territory. I mean, if you look at the map, we've taken, I'd say damn near half their territory from them. And then you have the threats with the United States recently with Donald Trump and the whole wall and stuff like that. And I can see them coming up with the argument of, like, you know how Russia made that argument about the reason why they were taking over the Eastern Bloc was because they were trying to create a buffer zone between Western Europe and Russia. I can see Mexico kind of making the same argument, but the only thing that puts a damper on that is they already own the territory that separates the United States from them. Like, it's just a border. And they're not going to be able to get into the United States and take some territory without a full-on invasion. So they would try to expand southward, but that excuse doesn't really work when you go southern or to the south. So I'm trying to think, because I see them possibly becoming something like that, but I'm wondering what they would do as far as a buffer zone between the United States and them. Because I can't really see it. Because again, I can't see anything unless they took territory from the United States. This is just me thinking out loud, really. But yeah, I can see it. It's there.
Finally, with regard to the US, it's quite possible we'll be gradually moving to a more isolationist or at least regionalist position, perhaps within a few decades. Because the US presently stands as the world's leading power and we already possess a great deal of land, the ambition for colonization here is quite low. However, we may soon find ourselves wanting to secure certain strategic lands of high importance to us. Immediately, the introduction of Cuba, Panama, and Greenland comes to mind. Oil resources in Venezuela may prove an attractive asset as well, not to mention possible concessions from Canada and the Northwest. Again, all these assumptions are merely speculative. It's fascinating to consider the various paths our nation may follow, and when it comes to the question of what has become of colonialism as an ideal, I'd argue it's remarkable how quickly it's been dismissed as a thing of the past, when it could very well sneak up on us yet again. Do let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if there's any other countries you believe have potential to rise as colonial empires in the not too distant future. The US of Z thanks you for watching. Support your legion by liking the video, or join our ranks by subscribing for more.
Yeah, all these
Mr. Z,
alternate history things are very
out.
interesting. So I'll probably end up checking out more of the channel at some point in the future. But yeah, I just want to let you guys know about that. One thing I was going to say is the United States, when it comes to colonialism, it really depends on what your definition is, because technically the United States does own military bases in like almost all of the major countries out there. So we do have like a military presence there. Now, the discussion that could be made is that technically us having some type of influence over them, because you can use defense as a type of negotiating chip when it comes to getting what you want from somebody, saying you're going to. It's like protection. So that's there. Now the question is there more that we would need in order to call it colonialism? Possibly, but I can see the United States being ambitious for certain things like that, especially for like key resources. I mean, any country, if they had the ability to gain control over a natural resource or be the dominant go-to source for a natural resource, they would do it. Like if a country had the ability to, or had the opportunity to take control of oil or steel or anything like that, they would do it without a heartbeat. So if the United States has the ability to gain control over territories that are very strong when it comes to like oil resources, I can see us doing something about it. Taking control of Venezuela, that's something that I can definitely see happening, because the rhetoric going on in the United States already is like trying to push Venezuela as this like evil empire, or not evil empire, but this evil nation that something needs to be done with. And usually when talk like that is happening in the United States, that's when things start to get a bit coup-ish. You know what I mean? Like, well, I think we've already admitted to trying to commit a coup in Venezuela. So I don't think that just stops. I think at some point something ends up happening, and then the United States is like, oh, look at that. Look what happened. Oh, damn, the president died. Who would have thought that the Venezuela president would just up and have a heart attack? I mean, it happens. I mean, but anyway, from what I've heard, there was an election, and the people just so happen to pick this guy that's really cool with us and is willing to give us almost all their resources. But I mean, stuff happens. It just happened that way, so you know, you just gotta go with it. So yeah, something like that could definitely happen. I think that America's presence in the Middle East is going to end at some point, because I don't see the benefit of it as much as they think it is. Like, personally, I think the whole Middle East thing to begin with started off first as an act of revenge, because George Bush wanted revenge for against Saddam Hussein. I think that it was a strategic thing that we could use as far as resources and territory and things like that. But with our relationship with the Saudi Arabia and things like that, which, by the way, I don't agree with. Saudi Arabia are pretty shitty. Not the people, but the government, pretty shitty. I can see us developing more relationships with Middle Eastern countries without necessarily trying to have direct control over them. I think that they would be more willing to, at some point in the future, they'd be more willing to be partners with the United States as far as like trade and things like that. And even if they don't, I think the relationship is going to get much better. Kind of the same way the United States is with Vietnam. I can see Um, I was about to say I could see us having more control over the Southeast Asia, like with the islands and things like that. But honestly, I don't think that either. Matter of fact, I think that we will either two things are going to happen. Either we're going to turn the territories that we own into states and give them full access to uh, what it is to be American, like full access to the government, voting, uh, benefits that states get, or we're going to give them away. Personally, I think that's what's going to happen. Now, you guys can agree or disagree with everything. I'd like to see what you would agree with or disagree with in the comment section. Feel free to have discussions and things like that. Try to keep it civil, of course. But whatever you have to suggest, I am all ears and would love to see what you guys are thinking about. But with that being said, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm Devon DaVinci. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and share. I will see you guys on the next video. And until then, I'm signing out. Deuces.